In today's Farm Report, the University of Minnesota Extension Services Farm Business Management courses has released its most recent data. Jim Sulfur with the University of Minnesota Extension Service talks about the 5-year history.
Today I'm going to spend some time talking about some costs over about the last 5 years, and then tomorrow I'll finish up really looking across at 20 years and what's really happened, because 20 years is a long period of time. When you look over the last 5 years, as I've been mentioning this week, 2014 was a pretty good year for dairy farmers. When you look at average milk prices across about the last 5 years, in 2014 we had about $25 was the average milk price, or $24.43 on a per hundredweight basis. When you look at 2013, it was about $20, so a pretty nice increase. 11 and 12 it was $19, and 2010 we were down at $16, and that's kind of been a traditional price, kind of that $14 to $17 range. So you can see we've been at a little higher level, but part of the reason for that is our costs have gone up so much over the last number of years. Part of that driven by feed costs, but part of it just driven by other costs. Interest rates are low, but repair costs are higher. It just seems like all costs have gone up pretty dramatically. Back in 2010, when we had $16 milk, our costs were at $14.15 per hundredweight, and for 2014 our costs averaged $18.45 per hundredweight. As I had mentioned yesterday, our average milk price that producers are receiving now are between $18, $19, somewhere in there. So right now we're at a pretty break-even level for a lot of farms. Part of that is driven by feed cost. Back in 2010, our feed cost was a little over $7 per hundredweight. Now over the last 3 years, we've averaged over $10 a hundredweight. Hopefully that'll come down somewhat, but it's really kind of driven by all those costs. Labor costs, of course, are up. That's up, over the last 4 or 5 years, from about $1.80 per hundredweight up well over $2 a hundredweight. And so you can see that cost has also gone up somewhat over the last 4 or 5 years. Even our family labor, it costs more for families to live, so our family labor is up a little bit higher than it maybe was. So when you look at kind of a summary over the last 5 years, milk prices are up, costs are up pretty substantially. Part of that's driven by feed costs, but it really seems like all costs have gone up somewhat, like people that aren't farmers. All of our costs have gone up too over the last 5 years. This has been Jim Sulfur with the University of Minnesota Extension in St. Cloud.
Most of Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack's day on Tuesday was spent on
phone calls to a variety of members of Congress to gauge their interest in TPA.
Trade Promotion Authority bills, now pending in the House and Senate, would give Congress some advanced say-so in setting trade agreement parameters, but limit it to an up or down vote on any final trade agreement. As to the vote on the TPA itself,
I believe it will be close in both the House and the Senate, which is why this administration is basically making an all-out effort to get it done.
Vilsack said if it doesn't get done, the first casualty could be the huge Trans-Pacific Partnership trade agreement. So without TPA,
it essentially will, for all intents and purposes, make it very difficult, if not impossible, to get any trade agreement negotiated, and even if it gets negotiated, to have it submitted to a vote where 535 members of Congress can propose an amendment or two, which will likely change the deal significantly, which means we won't have a deal.
That would put U.S. farmers at a disadvantage in the Asian market for decades.
A lot of ramifications to this TPA vote.
In Washington, Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Farm business management programs, like the one offered by the University of Minnesota Extension Service Office, often look at data from year to year, every 5 years, and every 20 years. Jim Sulfur with the University of Minnesota Extension Service Office has more on the data.
I'm going to be talking about the kind of the 20-year history of Finbin and where we've been with our farm management records and what they kind of show from some production and cost information. When you look at production per cow, it's increased dramatically. We just keep going up and up and up. And back in mid-1990s or mid-1995, we averaged about 17,000 pounds of milk per cow, and now we're up. The last 5 years we've averaged well over 20,000 pounds of milk per cow. Or actually, the last 7 years we've averaged well over 20. Each year it's a little bit higher. This year is the first year we broke 23,000, and we're about 23,500 pounds of milk per cow on an average. And the average cows per herd keeps going up. Back in the mid-90s, we averaged around 50 to 60 cows per herd. On this database now we're averaging about 175 or 180 cows per herd. Now again, these are farms that are just on farm management. This is an average for the state. The average for the state is going to be closer to about 125, but the median, so the middle, where half are above and half are lower, average still we're probably in the 70 to 80 cows in the middle, so half of the herds are smaller than that, half of the herds are larger than that. When you look at pounds of milk produced per farm, we were under 1 million pounds. We broke 1 million pounds in 1996, and now we're over 4 million pounds in this database, the average milk production per farm, and that's a combination, of course, of the number of cows and also the milk production per cow. It's interesting when you look at feed cost and milk price information. When you look at feed cost, our feed cost was really flat, or our total cost of production was really flat for a long period of time. Feed cost per hundredweight, we bounced around between $5 and $5.50 all the way from 1995 to 2005. Remember, that's when we started seeing a big increase in costs. And when you look at our milk price during that same period of time, it really didn't vary. It varied a lot, what we thought at the time, but not very much by today's standards. It varied from about $12 to $15, so we had kind of a $3 range there in milk price. And then all of a sudden, in about 2006, our feed cost jumped from about that $5 to $6. All of a sudden we were running $8, $9, and now the last 3 years we've been over $10 a hundredweight in feed cost. And our milk prices went up. We've averaged $18, $19. This year we were exceptional at $24. The real clinker was that 2009 when our milk price only averaged $13, but our feed cost went up to over $7, and so that really put a squeeze, and that was that really tough year. So those are kind of the 20-year history of where we've been with kind of costs and production and cows per herd. This has been Jim Selfer with the University of Minnesota Extension in St. Cloud.
As the number of poultry facilities hit by avian influenza increases, along with the number of birds involved, the cost of indemnities for poultry producers also on the rise. Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack telling farm broadcasters meeting this week in Washington that the money set aside for these kinds of payments was not near enough. USDA has gone to the Office of Management and Budget once already for authorization for more money.
We have received a prompt response from OMB, so we are in a position to deal with the losses that have occurred to date. We will probably likely go back to OMB in the very near future to ask for an additional allocation.
But producers only get paid for depopulated birds, not those dead from the disease, not for the full value of birds had they been marketed. But USDA Risk Management Administrator Brandon Willis says USDA is doing a study looking into this type of thing.
The study is on the feasibility of offering a crop insurance program that covers diseases.
Not just for poultry, but all livestock. That study not yet completed. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.